All right. Wow. That was a great introduction. And I know we only have an hour to talk about a journey that Brian and I have been hanging out for almost 6 years now, Brian.
Yes. Yep.
So we have a journey to explain with you. And then we also, especially if anyone, and please don't say if you did, if anyone was a part of the surveys that I had sent out back in December of a year past, and actually answered some of the questions about leading PBIS. We're going to also share that information for you. I think everyone in the PBIS network is really making sure that if we're going to ask you for feedback, we are also going to give you the results. So we're going to quickly go over that about midway through the session, but really it's about how do we engage with administrators as coaches, as either external coaches if we're a network facilitator, or a program-wide facilitator, and how do we do this as folks who are coaching in the district or in the agency, as well as the internal coaches that are at the individual program or building level. So really, that's what Brian and I were thinking about as we were going through. And then when you hear Brian's story, you will see that there are a lot of things that we learned that actually align to a lot of the research. So hopefully you'll find this helpful. So our learning intention today is, in your different roles, how do you communicate and collaborate with administrators? Because collaboration really is a very nebulous term. So what does it look like? How can we do that better? And in this session, we're going to look at, again, the study, and we're going to look at how do we, in our position, coach up? Because oftentimes we may have much more technical skills in some of the areas of PBIS than we may have with the leaders who are helping run to the school and the district or the organization on a daily basis. So I am so fortunate to hang out with the best people, and Brian Trusty is one of them. I always call him the director of better. So do you want to just a real quick snapshot? What does that mean at the Pathway School? What do you do?
So I am the director of organization effectiveness and development, which is big fancy words is I look at all the things we're doing at the school to help make them better. So I look at our leadership. I work with the PBS team and the core team, a member of the core team. I look at what we're doing for training and development. So I'm doing a lot of things just to make sure that we're moving our organization forward and providing it with ways of just being more effective and more impactful. In a nutshell.
That's a big one. See why I call him the director of better? Kind of makes sense, right? And I'm Becky Millspaugh. I get the opportunity to hang out with some of the most amazing people in the MCIU. And you can see all of my team members are also shouted out here because no one does this work alone. All right. Whoops. Go ahead. Here we go, Mr. Trusty.
So what I want you guys to do for me for a moment, just to kind of set our table, is I want you to take a moment and think of one thing in your world that's going right. It could be from work, it can be at home, but just think something in your world that's going right for you. Whether it's with friends or a family, it could be a big or small thing, it doesn't really matter. But I just want you to take a moment to really think about something in your world that's going right. And just throw that in the chat. And as you're thinking of that, I want you to think about how are you feeling when you think about those things are going right? Are you feeling happy? Right? Are you feeling accomplished? Are you feeling uplifted? So I'm seeing some really cool things. Home life, family, new home, intentional self-care, your kids. Right? You're feeling all these things, which are really, really important for us as people who are going to be involved with PBIS. I want you to think of what type of feelings you're having in those experiences. Think about right now how you're breathing as you're thinking about these things. When you think about these positive things, are you beginning to smile? Positivity is contagious. And Positive thoughts can cause a jump start. And that's what's so important for you guys as in your roles of always thinking about what's going right, because there can be so many things in your world that can be going sideways a little bit. If we can concentrate on things that are working, things that are moving forward, that will propel us to move forward. When we dwell on the things that are going wrong, or we dwell on the things that aren't going quite right for us, we can get derailed and off track. As your coaches, and as we go through the session today, if we're able to, it's a mindset. How do we make sure we're having the right mindset to keep us moving forward and keep us moving in positive ways? And how do we help our administrators and our coworkers and those people on the front lines of thinking about what's right with what's going on, opposed to what's not working? Cool, Becky, if you can go to the next slide.
Absolutely.
So I just want to give a little demographic about where I'm coming from. So I work at Pathway School. It's a little school outside of King of Prussia, Valley Forge, Norristown area, and Montgomery County. And we're a approved private school. We're about 170 kids. We range in age from 5 to 21. And we have autism, spectrum disorder, and different intellectual disabilities with some emotional and behavioral impairments that we work with. And we, at our mission of school, we are really looking at how to build academic, social, and life skills with students with special needs to promote success and independence after Pathway. And this mission that we've developed, this was really a cool thing, because when we developed this mission statement, this was one that we developed when we rebooted. And I'll talk about our reboot in a little bit. But this was something that was developed and designed by our whole Pathway community. And that's one of the key parts that I will talk to you guys about is the way we got buy-in. And one of the things that my PBIS angel, which I will talk about also a little bit later on, really kind of drove home with us is the best way of getting buy-in is making sure people are included. And this, our vision statement, was one that we got total buy-in by everyone, that people had a chance to look at them and vote on it and doctor it up to where we got to something that we could all agree on so we could move forward with it. So we can go to the next slide there, Becky.
Sure. Oops, sorry.
Sure. So here's the history of the Pathway School with PBIS. We started PBIS in August of 2012, and we made a lot of mistakes when we first started. One of the things that we really created initially was a PBIS program. And as you all know, PBIS is not a program, it is a network. It's a network of how you do things. It's not a one-off. But when we initially created it, we created really, as we looked at it afterwards, we really developed an internal program. And that's sometimes hard for people because people always say, what's your PBIS program? What's the program you guys have? And really getting people to look at it as a framework and a network is what you're really trying to create, is create that framework of things. We did have a lot of external supports. When we first initially put together, it was done internally. And then as we start doing things, people start making small modifications. And each small modification diluted what we were doing. So in 2016, we had some leadership changes, and that leadership change looked at what we were doing and said, you know what, we're not doing PBIS anymore. We're doing a behavior modification program, but we're not doing PBIS anymore. So we contracted with the MCIU, and I partnered with my friend Becky Millspaugh. And Becky looked at what we were doing, and she had to talk to me several different times because I would say, Becky, we have PBIS. And she'd go, Brian, yeah, you don't. And I'm going, no, but Becky, we do. We have this, and this. We're going, she says, yeah, I see all that, Brian, but you don't have it. So through those conversations, we started really talking and digging in. We created a small group of PBIS champions to learn PBIS, to assist and guide the organization, and to really build a strong foundation. And we took almost a full year to build a good foundation of what it was going to look like and get that buy-in both from our leadership team and from our individual contributors. From there, we installed our new PIS. We put all the pieces in place, our behavior expectations, our lesson plans, our instructional management flow chart, establishing our social cultures, our announcement systems, but we put all of the pieces in place. And we did that through workshops and in-service training with all of our staff. And so everything that we got our staff from all parts of the school, not just our teachers and not just our teacher assistants, but our administrators. We invited our HR staff. We invited our maintenance staff, everybody that was going to see kids, touch kids. We invited them to these meetings and said, okay, what does this look like in your world when you're touching kids, when you're seeing kids, when you're involved with kids? So as many people as possible knew exactly what we were doing right out of the gate, which has always come back to us now really meaningful, because as we go to make changes, it's not something that we were told to do, it's something that we created as a group together. The following year, we were able to make some additional changes. One of the major changes that we did in 2018-19 is we installed assistant of PBIS coordinator position was developed. That position was really start looking and making sure that we didn't fall off. A lot of those responsibilities were falling amongst lots of different people, which we were able to maintain, but getting somebody's eyes on this that was going to be doing this on a regular basis was going to be a key element for us to have success.
And that PBIS coordinator operates like it would in a public school as an internal coach. So that's really what that became, because prior to that, Brian's right, they had a lot of different people taking a lot of different parts, and the communication was really rough. And without that internal coach, that's the beauty of the way this network has continued to thrive.
So, and then 2019-20, we created our advanced tiers team. That PBIS coordinator that was a part-time position before became full-time with us as we started doing our advanced tier pieces. And then we were lucky, and then we were fortunate enough to be able to be recognized Tier 1 Fidelity in 2019-2020. So from 2012, it took us until 2019, 2020 to get Tier 1 Fidelity. So we had a journey. We had a long journey to correct ourselves, align ourselves, and really put in place what we're talking about doing. And that, again, that came through in doing that, through making sure that we had the right people at the right times, with the right involvement, with the right support and connectedness to our leadership team members. One of the things that we made sure we did as a leadership team, which was all of our directors, our principals, was that we made sure that PBIS became part of an ongoing agenda item. So every time we meet, we're talking about what PBIS items were coming up, what were issues that were going on, and made it part of who we were organizationally, and not just another one of the things we do. We made sure it was involved throughout the thread of who we were as an organization. In 2020-21, we were able to, when the world closed down, we were able to maintain our PBIS. We were able to pivot very quickly and go virtual and hybrid settings. We adjusted our behavior matrix to include virtual hybrid setting to one of our areas, to our behavior matrix. And we were able to continue doing our mystery motivators and our achievement model, and also be able to support our classrooms and meet as a core team virtually throughout that pandemic, and also through our hybrid settings through the 2020 through 2021-22 school years. And to a point where we were very happy about being able to be recognized in 2021-22 at the last PBIS implementer forum to be PBIS sustaining for this last year. So that was so from a school standpoint, was a nice accomplishment we really get to. So the number thing we had to do was get that leadership buy-in from the Pathway School. And the one thing that we had to make sure that happened was we had new memberships on our director's leadership level. So communication was critically important. So we made sure we had to communicate both up and down within our organization so that we kept everybody in line with what was going on. We also had to make sure we had champions for the school, for PBIS. I was one of those people. PBS coordinator, Chelsea Miller, was one of those. And we also had our external angel of Becky Millspaugh, who challenged our leadership team. Every time I ran into a problem, I would get on the phone with Becky going, I'm not sure what I'm doing, Becky. She's going, Brian, you got this. Hang in there. I would have Becky come and meet with our leadership team if there was significant questions that we had. But it was really important that we championed what we're looking for and making sure we're moving things forward. We made sure we incorporate our PBIS, as I said before, incorporate PBS into our existing agendas. So that was something that was happening not only at our leadership level and not just at core team level, but it's happening at all building meetings and department meetings. What's going on with PBIS? What's going right? What's going wrong? What can we be looking at? So it's always looking at this kind of thing. So not only we were always making sure we were following the data and making data-driven decisions, which is always critical, making those data-driven decisions, but we also want to get a sense of how are people seeing this and how are people feeling it? Because people are going to judge that data based on how they're feeling and seeing it. So we want to always try to keep the temperature of where people were so we can see how can we make those adjustments when necessary. We have really made sure that we were sticking to foundational skills, trying to make sure we weren't modifying or straying away from those things, so we can maintain fidelity. And if we were to stray away, it was easy to get back to fidelity and get back to doing things the right way. So it was really important for us, especially initially, and especially as we were teaching our administrators and as we were teaching them what PBS really was, making sure they understood those foundational pieces. I still get asked today, well, how do I know PBS is working? And I say, well, let's look at what the data is telling us. We were a school that, because of the nature of our students, we would have students who would have some very physical types of interventions that would need to occur. We, in this first part of the school year, we were able to report that we had one restraint of the students from September to December, which to put that in context for people, it would not be unusual prior to 2016 for us to have upwards of 5 to 10 a day. So that we were able to, with putting PBIS in place, by putting programs in place that supported PBIS within the framework, we were able to go from September to the end of December with one restraint in that half of the school year. So so again, those are all from the sticking to those foundational pieces and understanding what are we trying to do and how we're going to do this.
I can say the hardest part, Brian, was your data of what data do we share? Because when you have a school, and you might be experiencing this now, because I have a lot of schools that have a lot of transition, a lot of new kids coming in that you didn't have before, some that were maybe in a cyber situation, now they're coming back. Or maybe they've never been in a regular school because they have been in a different situation. But what's happening at Pathway School is that when students are coming in, they are often in crisis. They're often at a level of such a degree where their least restrictive environment is in and outside of their neighborhood school. So to have that kind of reduction of risk was pretty significant. And I think using that kind of data instead of just frequency of the number of referrals was critical, because oftentimes you're going to have a student who doesn't know the expectations of Pathway, right? But because you have these systems in place, you're starting to see that payoff, and it's much more quickly than it was the 4 years that we were together, right?
Exactly. And it's also about understanding the data. So, for example, what we found last February was that we were seeing a increase in our risk assessment. So you would think that's a bad number. But in reality, what it was is that we did training with staff about risk assessments and what that looked like. So staff were more in tune to what those looked like, so they were reporting them more, which allowed our clinical team and our behavior team to get those students quicker and earlier. So we saw a reduction in our hospitalizations. We saw a reduction in returning and more significant issues, but we saw an increase in those risk assessments. So when you heard risk assessments go up, everybody got worried. And the reality was, now we don't want them to stay that high, but because people were reporting them, our staff were able to respond to issues at a more quicker level, which allowed us to make sure we were able to address students earlier, which meant that students were getting to that critical piece and that tipping point piece to having this more physical, emotional explosions. So while we were seeing kids more frequently and quicker, which allowed us to make sure we were in those kind of immediate crises all the time, which is also ultimately better for the student.
Absolutely.
So one of the hard things that you guys, I know all of you guys do, and it's a hard thing that I had to do, because before I have just recently moved into the director position. But part of that, I was not a director of the school, so I was in a leadership role that was reporting up to directors. So I recognize some of the things you guys are saying is, working with the principals or working with the people in leadership roles, my supervisor, can sometimes be difficult because they understand parts of things, but they don't understand all of it. And getting it right on the same page. So to do that, one of the things that was critically important for us is to have really courageous conversations establishing why. Why are we going to do something? There's one of the things that was challenging at times, some things that are really important, but the clearer you understand why something we're doing PBIS-wise is important, and you're able to establish what that why is, the easier it will be for you to explain that going up. But if you're not understanding really the why, and you're doing it because you think we should, then it becomes harder for you to defend it. When you can really establish what the why is, then you can kind of map it back out and explain to those folks of why what we're doing is important, why is this piece going to be critically to us, and how we move those things forward. And if you need assistance, go out and find your PBS angels out there, as I found mine, who often comes with me, because you might need a partner to go in with you going, okay, gang, here's why we need to do this. As Brian said to you, this is why we're doing this. And they go, oh, okay, Becky.
Oops, sorry.
But also that you're able to have those honest conversations with your leadership. Being able to say to them what's working, what's not working. Here's what's really being beneficial to us. And you know what? Right now, this isn't going to work, and that's okay. Because we're going to get this part working first, and then we're going to add on to it. And the clearer people are to that piece, and the clearer they are to help them move things forward in the next part. So we're going to show you a quick video. I think this is a video that Becky shared with me. I think is really important about who your champion is, and think about who your champions are. So we're going to show you this video, and then I have a couple quick questions for you afterwards.
Oh, and I tried to make it so there were no ads.
I have spent my entire life either at the schoolhouse, on the way to the schoolhouse, or talking about what happens in the schoolhouse. Both my parents were educators. My maternal grandparents were educators. And for the past 40 years, I've done the same thing. And so needless to say, over those years, I've had a chance to look at education reform from a lot of perspectives. Some of those reforms have been good, some of them have been not so good. And we know why kids drop out. We know why kids don't learn. It's either poverty, low attendance, negative peer influences. We know why. But one of the things that we never discuss, or we rarely discuss, is the value and importance of human connection. Relationships. James Comer says that no significant learning can occur without a significant relationship. George Washington Carver says all learning is understanding relationships. Everyone in this room has been affected by a teacher or an adult. For years, I have watched people teach. I have looked at the best, and I've looked at some of the worst. A colleague said to me one time, they don't pay me to like the kids. They pay me to teach a lesson. The kids should learn it. I should teach it. They should learn it. Case closed. Well, I said to her, you know, kids don't learn from people they don't like. She said, that's just a bunch of hooey. And I said to her, well, your year is gonna be long and arduous, dear. Needless to say, it was. Some people think that you can either have it in you to build a relationship or you don't. I think Stephen Covey had the right idea. He said you ought to just throw in a few simple things, like seeking first to understand as opposed to being understood. Simple things like apologizing. You ever thought about that? Tell a kid you're sorry, they're in shock. I taught a lesson once on ratios. I'm not real good with math, but I was working on it. And I got back and looked at that teacher edition. I taught the whole lesson wrong. So I came back to class the next day and I said, look, guys, I need to apologize. I taught the whole lesson wrong. I'm so sorry. They said, that's okay, Miss Pearson. You were so excited. We just let you go. I have had classes that were so low, so academically deficient that I cried. I wondered, how am I going to take this group in 9 months from where they are to where they need to be? And it was difficult. It was awfully hard. How do I raise the self-esteem of a child and his academic achievement at the same time? One year I came up with a bright idea. I told all my students, you were chosen to be in my class. Because I am the best teacher and you are the best students, they put us all together so we could show everybody else how to do it. One of the students said, really? I said, really? We have to show the other classes how to do it. So when we walk down the hall, people will notice us. So you can't make noise, you just have to strut. And I gave him a saying to say, I am somebody. I was somebody when I came. I'll be a better somebody when I leave. I am powerful and I am strong. I deserve the education that I get here. I have things to do, people to impress, and places to go. And they said, yeah. You say it long enough, it starts to be a part of you. And so, I gave a quiz, 20 questions. Student missed 18. I put a +2 on this paper and a big smiley face. He said, Miss Pearson, is this an F? I said, yes. He said, then why'd you put a smiley face? I said, because you on the roll. You got 2 right, you didn't miss them all. I said, and when we review this, won't you do better? He said, yes, ma'am, I can do better. You see, -18 sucks all the life out of you. +2 said, I ain't all bad. For years, I watched my mother take the time at recess to review, go on home visits in the afternoon, buy combs and brushes and peanut butter and crackers to put in her desk drawer for kids that needed to eat, and a washcloth and some soap for the kids who didn't smell so good. See, it's hard to teach kids who stink. And kids can be cruel. And so she kept those things in her desk, and years later, after she retired, I watched some of those same kids come through and say to her, you know, Miss Walker, you made a difference in my life. You made it work for me. You made me feel like I was somebody when I knew at the bottom I wasn't. And I want you to just see what I've become. And when my mama died 2 years ago at 92, there were so many former students at her funeral. It brought tears to my eyes, not because she was gone, but because she left a legacy of relationships that could never disappear. Can we stand to have more relationships? Absolutely. Will you like all your children? Of course not. And you know your toughest kids are never absent. Never. You won't like them all, and the tough ones show up for a reason. It's the connection, it's the relationships. And while you won't like them all, the key is they can never, ever know it.
So teachers become great actors and great actresses, and we come to work when we don't feel like it, and we listen to policy that doesn't make sense, and we teach anyway. We teach anyway because that's what we do. Teaching and learning should bring joy. How powerful would our world be if we had kids who were not afraid to take risks, who were not afraid to think, and who had a champion? Every child deserves a champion, an adult who will never give up on them, who understands the power of connection and insists that they become the best that they can possibly be. Is this job tough? You betcha. Oh God, you betcha. But it is not impossible. We can do this. We're educators. We're born to make a difference. Thank you so much.
So when we look at this, one of the things I'm going to ask you guys, so we look at the video, and obviously Ms. Pearson did a beautiful job speaking about that idea of champion and being a champion for our students. And we all kind of understand that. That's why we're in this field. That's why you guys are all on this call today, because you guys care about your kids and you care about your school. But also you're the champions of your organization for PBIS, because that's why you're here today, because you guys believe in PBIS and you believe it into your schools and you want to be seeing it better. And the people on this particular session, you guys have been doing this for a couple of years, and you're obviously going to look at ways how we can do this better. So the first thing I'm going to say to you is, who is your champion? Because just as every kid needs a champion, you as the PBIS coach or facilitator in your organization, in your school, you need a champion too. You need that person who has your back. You need that person that pumps you up, because there will be things and people and situations that will keep telling you that this doesn't work, or this isn't working, or why doesn't this do this, or why can't we do that? And you're going to have to always keep moving them back to center, because they're going to want to move other places. They're going to want to drift. They're going to want to find the newest, fanciest thing to do. And you're going to be the person who has to keep everything moving forward. And the only way you're going to be able to have that bandwidth is, who is your champion? Find that person, whether it's in your organization, whether it's your facility network network facilitator. Again, I kid, but truly, if it wasn't for my partnership with Becky, and I truly say it is a true partnership, Pathway School would have gone off the rails so many different times. And through the pandemic, there were times where I would call Becky midday as I'm sitting in my home going, I don't know how to do this. And she would go, Brian, what I want you to do is stop. I want you to breathe. And let's talk through what we can do. But you need to find that person for you. You're going to find that person for you that can walk you back, that can keep you focused and keep you straight, so you can be the champion for others to keep them focused and keep you straight. So find the person who can provide the supports to you. I want you to think about how important it is that person could be in your life, and how important that person could be in the life of your school. So always look for those individuals and make sure you're tapping into this. When you try to do this on your own, when you try to do this alone, or you try to do this with people who aren't quite sure what you're trying to get accomplished, it can lead you off track. And that's going to be the number one thing as you're looking at how you impact your administrators, is that you have to make sure that you are confident in where you are, so you can help them be confident in where they are. And that's both up and down. It's about how to make sure the people around you are confident in where they are in the situation, because without that, they're going to try to find their comfort. So what you need to do is, as you're looking for that champion, how to help them define their comfort. I love when Ms. Pearson said that +2 means you're on the road. -18 will suck the life out of you. So we can, and we are naturally problem finders. We will find what the problems is, and then we will talk about the problems. I know how many times you guys have been to a meeting to discuss a problem, and if your meetings are anything like ours, You go to the meeting, somebody addresses the problem, and then somebody else goes, yeah, that happened to me too. And then they all talk about their problem for 5-10 minutes. And somebody else goes, yeah, but I had the same problem. And so you spend the first half an hour to 45 minutes identifying the problem and all the variations of the problem. And then try 15 minutes to tie together a quick solution, a quick problem solving to that situation. As a champion, you're going to help us define what issues are and define what success is. So we'll look at that a little bit later on. So defining what your roles are as internal coaches at the Pathway School, one of the things we had to make sure we understood that there was a lot of different pieces to this, right? There's lots of different pieces to the work that you're going to do. So we had to make sure that we found somebody who kept an eye on the prize. It was so important, is that one of the reasons that I created that the internal coach, the coordinator position, was to make sure that somebody every day was looking at how PBIS was working at our school. It's going to help us make sure we didn't have drift, because people are going to want to look at what's going on and make small tweaks to make things work for them in their area. And while that small tweak may not look like it's a big deal, every small tweak takes from center to left or right of center. And before you know, instead of going straight, you're somewhere east or west of where you want to be. That person who's looking at this every day will help us make sure that we're not making modifications that will have long-term consequences or long-term impact. And it will also help us identify when gaps start occurring because we led astray. One of the things that we learned when we first did PBIS, we had something called a spontaneous, as part of our acknowledgement system, we had spontaneous reward tickets that were supposed to be part of our achievement that you give out as a modification to the behavior modifications. And then we just give out to students every once in a while. And what happened was staff started using those as their classroom management systems. And over a period of time, it just became more and more diluted. And to a point that it no longer became a spontaneous ticket, it became an earned ticket. And there is a difference. There should be a classroom management system that's in place, but the spontaneous ticket was really supposed to be an add-on to really say, hey, you're doing a good job here. Here's a really nice way of recognizing it. So when we rebooted, one of the things we had to do was we had to scrap the name and call something totally different so people would treat it different, even though it was supposed to be technically the same thing. One of those things because the gap was identified, we had to figure out how we're going to fix the gap that we created, because we started making small, different changes as we're going along. So that's why it's important to have somebody who's looking at this every day, because they're going to be able to see what's going on, what's the purpose of this, and are we doing this correctly, and how are we doing this in a way that's most beneficial to us as an organization. Also at the school, what we wanted to do is we also made sure that we have persistence statements that we used, and that it was important to us that we really start becoming really data-driven in our decision-making. And we all say we were data-driven decision-making, but it was really critically important that we use those in a way that was going to be best for us in our organization, that those persistence statements that were not universal, that we got into the appropriate teams and that we had follow-ups that were able to close the loops. One of the other things we had to make sure that internal coach was helping and defining was sharing the announcements, sharing the celebrations, doing face-to-face about PBIS, whether it is a big things or small things. Success breeds more success. And we found that with our organization, whether you are visiting a classroom or whether they were telling a message over to the speaker, whether we were doing a pep rally, whether they were sharing it, going and sharing it with the president of the school, but sharing all the successes. Make sure those announcements are going out and you're sharing those good things that are happening. That person had that help and support is the coach, is that we want to make sure that person who is in our PBIS coach was answering the questions that people may have, supporting them as they came through, and make sure they were there as that support, and not there to just tell them somebody they weren't doing it right. It is more of, here's another way of doing this. Sometimes it's language, but it's really about how do you make sure we have somebody there who was helping and supporting our team on a regular basis. And another thing is that making sure that you're visible to the organization. And one of the things that we did was that we made sure, like when we bring new staff on, we're doing orientation, Our PBIS coach is one of the first people to meet our staff. And they do a real quick overview of what PBIS is, how it's being used, and just some general overviews. But the important piece here is that PBIS was part of the initial training of the school. It's not an add-on, it's who we are. And we make sure one of the first people they know, one of the first resources that all of our staff, no matter what position they're going to have, gets is to see our PBIS person. So they know who that person is and who that is. And while that may sound kind of a small point, it's a huge point, because when I have a question, one of the first people that I meet, I'm going to go, oh yeah, I remember meeting that person on my first day. And while you may say, well, can't it be the second day? Think about when you orient someplace. Who do you remember? The first person you meet or the 10th person you meet? As soon as you can get that person in front of them, and they were able to establish that, and they also are able to establish that this is the person I go to if I have a PBIS question. Here's the person I can go to if I have a question around how can this work in my classroom, in my area. It made them be a point of reference, which also made them a point of reference not only for the staff, but then it also makes it a point of reference for the organization, makes you a point of reference for the administrators.
So this leads to just a very quick, I wanted to share out, especially if you help me out with that study. There was a study done that is part of what would be shared at the APBS conference. If you were on the first meeting session, you were able to get on. The PBIS network study, I looked at the schools that had actually kept Fidelity over the year we shut down, and then the following year during the pandemic. And I gave you this link that's on the PowerPoint because this is a great implementation leadership measure. And the particular one that I used, if you happen to fill it out, looked at how did staff members perceive the leadership that was needed in order for PBIS to continue and thrive. And then what did the principal actually report? And so I'm going to share with you what those results were, but I do want you to think about this. When you're leading and you're coaching up, the types of things that make an impact on keeping this level of fidelity with any evidence-based practice, which is what? Multi-tiered systems of support for behavior, otherwise known as PBIS. These are the critical elements that we need to consider. Proactivity, being preventative, right? Thinking ahead of where the pitfalls might be, just like Brian was talking about. Being knowledgeable and actually sharing that knowledge and having the leader be knowledgeable of what is happening with PBIS. Being supportive meaning when things are going right and also when things there are challenges in the way. Perseverance means that when there are challenges, we're looking to overcome them and we're bringing people with us. Communication, vision, and mission are two that are almost interrelatable. And I'll share with you where we fell in that particular, whether it was great, to great extent. We'll look at that because those two actually match each other. Notice that Brian was explaining the vision, the mission first, what they believed, the vision of where they wanted to go. And then that was communicated throughout. Those are key elements as well as the availability of when there is an issue, who do I go to and how do I get the help that I need? And that's really what we're looking at, availability. Those implementation leadership scales are there. The researchers who allowed me to use them, put them on their website. So that was a really great add-on. So if you're interested, because there's others that you might want to take a look at. So in essence, I had about 90 staff members from our network that were from schools that I described, and about 62 principals. So while that was a smaller sample size, especially during the pandemic, when you look at for those who could have answered, that's the middle column, and those that actually answered in the survey, you can see that the representation is very similar, right? You see the elementary school was at 64%, and about 68% of those who answered in the SILs came from that designation. So while I can't say that this is true for most schools, we can see that the representation was very, very similar. So what that looked like was when we measured both staff and principals, basically we were still looking at the grade extent rate. So that grade extent rate in all of those areas was pretty high and very close. And you can see where it was lower was communication and vision and mission. And the interesting thing is while the principals, the ultimate optimists, were a little bit higher, it wasn't very much higher. And when it was lower, the staff also indicated it was lower. So when you take a look at it, communication and vision and mission being some of the lower areas, we know that that's probably a good place to start, especially when you're in a position where you're coaching up or you're helping to do that communication. I do want to point out that even though availability was one of the highest ranked leadership elements, there was a significant difference. It was about a medium effect size, but there was a difference between what principals felt was their availability to staff and what staff are actually experiencing. And the reason why I point this out here is if you are having those questions, and if you as a leadership team are thinking about that, you could literally go to this same website that I gave you the slide before, and you can do the same thing and see, is there a difference between what your staff thinks and what some of the leaders think in ways that they are supporting PBIS. So again, just a really great survey. I would not have been able to have found it had I not gone into the mental health research, because the mental health researchers had actually been looking at this. So just something to keep in mind, and thank you also if you've completed that. We also had focus groups in that same study. There were 14 principals that agreed to come together to talk about what works and what doesn't work when moving PBIS forward. And what we thought was important is to share that information with you, because again, while that number of 14 is small, it still was very representative. You can see on that, the second and third columns, very representative of the schools that were eligible to be part of the groups. So one of the first themes, and it sounds like this is what Brian was saying, was focus on relationships. Every single group talked about that, listening to positive and negative feedback, inviting others to make change, finding those champions, building trust, and celebrating with staff. Oftentimes we bring the problems to the staff, but when there's a lack of data, that's also a celebration, right? And when there was a lack of intensity and the intensity drops, that's still a celebration. So that was an important key concept in leading this role. And even though the principals brought this to the table, I think as coaches, we need to consider the same. The second theme was preparing staff to implement. We often jump into things without proper preparation. And this was very clear from some of these principals who had been a principal for 23 years and some that were for 5 years. So you could see that the gamut was building the knowledge of the leaders, that means you as a coach as well, and the staff, and providing time for exploration before we jump into doing something. And having a vision. If you don't know what PBIS should look like and your staff can't speak to that, you're going to have difficulty continuing to push that ball up the hill, right? So you're going to also define the need, as Brian was talking about, and then generating staff interest, right? Interest in why we're doing what we're doing. The third theme that came from those focus groups was supporting the leadership team. And as an internal coach, that's a lot of what you're doing. As a district level coach, that's a lot of what you're doing. So you're empowering team members, but it's hard to empower a team member who doesn't know what the vision is. So that's why that kind of goes hand in hand. Also, sharing leadership decisions. When one person does all of the decision making or runs the meeting, is a facilitator and a note taker and reading off the data, that's really difficult to grow that empowerment. So how do we, in an appropriate way, make sure that we share those tasks? And how do we make sure that we got the voices at the table? And if we can't get everybody's voice at the table, I want to point out to you, the Pathway School does not have substitutes. So we have to be very creative of how this works. So sometimes you may not have everybody at the table, but how do we get the voices to move forward? And I think that's a critical piece there. And then also making sure that you're supporting the completion of team tasks. There's nothing worse than keep coming back over the same thing over and over again, because people will lose their own, including principals who have 1,000,001 different things that they have to focus on, right? The fourth one was promotion. You heard Brian talk about this. Actively modeling PBIS practices anywhere we go is a really great way to promote this process without preaching. You model it, right? and being consistent throughout the process. So once you have something, stick with it. We jump ship so fast that sometimes we don't get the opportunity to see it long enough through. So that's going to be important too. So when staff members want to change and want to move over, just think about that. Also, leverage your resources. Think about what is out there. Think about what's in the community. Talk it up in the community, because it's amazing what people will come to you with. Integrating PBIS with existing initiatives. Pathway didn't say, and these programs will do PBIS and this program will not. No, it's how do we integrate this? And then communicating how important it is over and over and over again, so that people will understand that this is just the way of being, just like Brian was saying. And the last theme that was discovered by the principals during these focus groups is to really think about your data, but not just data in how many referrals do I have, or is the behavior getting better or worse, also looking at fidelity. How close are we to doing what we said we were going to do? And then what was the impact? Always looking at fidelity before the outcome, because if we didn't do what we said we were going to do, then how are we expecting different results? And it's really easy to blame some of our students, or even to blame the staff, if we're not necessarily looking at the quality of implementation. So really that sustaining of fidelity is critically important in order to move forward. And I did that very quick, because the most important thing is, now that we know those elements that were identified not only in research, but then we're also verified by our own folks in the PAPBS network, how do we achieve that? Brian, I turn it over.
So there's a book. So we have this PowerPoint is going to be available to you guys. So I'm going to run through some of these, and I'm going to highlight some of them so we get through them all, and give you a little time for question and answer at the end. But all these, so if I don't hit on one of these, you will see them someplace else where you can grab them. So number one is breathe. It could be intimidating with any hierarchy. Take a deep breath. It will be okay. And work with your network facilitator. Again, I can't speak more about mine. I've already shared how my fondness for mine, but that person is going to help you both craft ideas, come up with strategies on how to get that buy-in with your administrators and with your whole team in general. Make sure you're confident, make sure you're comfortable with data. Some of us aren't really comfortable with data. We're going to look at things that way. And make sure you're speaking from the data and not from the I thinks or I feels. It's hard to always justify I feel something's happening or I think something's happening, as opposed to the data showing me this is happening. Always trying to link things to the behaviors, as much evidence we can possibly have with those. Another key one here is you are the PBIS language translator in your organization, both up and down. Sometimes we start being able to throw around terms, and it's real important that we are able to clarify things for people. So while you may understand what a precision statement is, and you may understand how a precision statement is developed, somebody who's not living with that precision statement or that language on a day-to-day basis may not understand, or only may understand it partially. So make sure you're able to translate that language both up and down your organization. Okay, Becky, you can go to the next one. Mm-hmm. Make sure here on this is that you understand what's important to them. People are going to respond to facts are important and data is important, but also how those facts and data impact my world is also important. If you haven't created those positive linkages to here's the data and here's why it's important to you, then people aren't going to pay attention to it. It's going to be more noise. Because the important thing is, if everything's important, then nothing's important. So everything you say can't be the most important thing. What's important, and make sure you're sharing those important pieces out, and make sure you're making those linkages to people, because we all have lots of things that are important in our day, and if we overload folks, they're not going to. It's going to be just, well, that's important, and that I have 10 other things that are important too in my day. Another thing that's also helpful as you are trying to engage with your administrator is make sure you set up regular meeting times, whether it's once a week, once every 2 weeks, whatever it is, but make sure you're getting yourself in front of those people especially your high decision makers, as often as possible, so you can just have that dialogue and they can start seeking you out. Because that's what that as Becky mentioned earlier, relationship becomes important. And if they can trust your information, they can trust who you're saying, then when issues come up, they're going to go and seek you out, opposed to trying to solve that problem or not figure out where it's coming from. But if you set up some kind of regular time, they're going to go, oh yeah, that's right, I can remember, I can go and see this person. They will be able to help me identify this issue and help me find solutions to this. The next one, Becky. We want to make sure here that sometimes it's not always about solving the problem. So that second one there. Sometimes it's about finding common links. There's going to be problems that always will come up and are addressed, but sometimes the best way of finding solutions is to find out where our commonalities are, and then figure out how do we then move from there to then identify what the issues are. But we're always looking at what the problems are from my point of view. Becky's looking from her point of view, and Kelly's looking from her point of view. Then we may not be able to, then we're all going to try and fix a problem that's going to solve my need. If I'm able to find my common links, then we can solve our organization need. Okay, Becky, we can do the last one. And here is, sometimes you're going to need to just chip away at problems. Finding those small wins, finding those opportunities to have success. As I said earlier, success breeds more success. And you don't always have to wait till the whole problem's fixed. It can be done incrementally. Sometimes you'll get questions, or your administrator will want you to say, here's what we're doing, and they're going to want you to put something in place so that the problem's now solved. And it's about sometimes of doing small incremental things so you can breed more success as you move forward and moving along. These solution finders are not problem solvers. And while that may, again, be wordplay, it's really a mindset. When I'm solution finding, I go into every situation going, I identify what the problem is, and here's how I think we can solve it. Opposed to, here's what the problems are, and I'm going to continue trying to find those problems, and then we'll find a solution afterwards. So really trying to think of that, and the key there is make sure you're using those precision statements, because those are going to be things that help you drive information and drive data. And it will also teach individuals that data is important. If your staff and your administrators aren't seeing data as important, then they're not going to understand why they're collecting the data. So that's an important piece of being your solution finder, is making sure you're using it from a data-driven mindset. And then finally, we have be the PBIS ambassador. Whether every time you guys meet, everywhere you go, you are the cheerleader. You are the connector. You are the person who's going to make sure that everything's kind of running there together, and making sure that you are comfortable with the data and the speaking, to make sure that things are able to move forward in that way.